Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. Are you free right now? Come to the Civil Affairs Bureau. That cold, emotionless voice came from Ethan over the phone. Ethan and I have been married for 4 years. Today is our wedding anniversary. I was carefully preparing a surprise for him, yet he suddenly called to tell me he wanted a divorce. Hello? Why are you saying this all of a sudden? I was a little stunned. Ethan and I have known each other for at least 10 years. When he was in college, I used the allowance my family gave me to support him so he could focus on preparing for graduate school without distractions. Later, he rose steadily through the ranks and eventually became the youngest associate professor at a university, brilliant and admired by thousands. I, on the other hand, followed my family's arrangements and got engaged, then married to him. Ella, the person I've always loved, is Diane, but the one I love is gone. I had no interest in wasting words with him anymore. I'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau now. Whoever refuses the divorce is a coward. I, Ella, have lived a smooth life. I've never faced any real setbacks, but now I've discovered that the husband I've been married to for 4 years has always loved someone else. That's emotional betrayal. When we arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau, Ethan looked indifferent. His features were sharp and cold, but the redness at the corner of his eyes drew attention. He was dressed in a sharp black suit with a white flower pinned to his chest. He looked like someone who had just attended a funeral. What right did you have to attend Diane's funeral as her husband? I wanted to laugh. If he was Diane's husband, then what did the 4 years I spent sharing a bed with him mean? Was I just a tool, someone to keep him company? I was angry. If you liked her, why didn't you say so earlier? Did I ever stop you? Ethan's icy gaze swept over me. His eyes gleamed with a cold light. He said flatly, "Back then your father invested so many resources in me. If I didn't marry you, do you think he would have let me continue my academic career? You got everything so easily, yet look how badly you hurt Diane." I snapped. Who asked me to help you in the first place? As far as I remember, the only connection between Ethan and Diane was back when I was in college. Diane once went viral online with a short bragging essay that caught the school's attention. Ethan secretly helped her publish papers and recommended her for graduate school. That was an abuse of authority. At the time, I didn't want the matter to get out of hand and drag Ethan down with it, which could have ended his academic career. So my family and I spent a fortune to suppress the issue. We kept it limited to small circles within the school. With my family's help, Ethan was ultimately protected. He only received a disciplinary warning, but Diane was punished by the school and had to transfer to a university in another province. Thinking back, Ethan closed his eyes to hide the pain in them. If I could go back in time, I'd rather let my reputation be destroyed than leave her without a home. Ethan and I quickly signed the divorce papers at the Civil Affairs Bureau. On the way back, just as I was turning at an intersection, a large truck suddenly swerved and crashed into my car. The impact was so strong that I started to lose consciousness. In my days, I saw Ethan get out of his car. After all, we had been husband and wife. I reached out my hand to him, pleading for help. "Please just call an ambulance, just take me to the hospital." But Ethan deliberately avoided my blood-covered hand with a look of disgust. He let out a cold smile. "Ella, this is karma. I loved her long before. All these years I've been secretly keeping track of her. If you hadn't heartlessly refused to save her back then, Diane and I could have been together already. You saved me fine, but why didn't you save Diane too? Because of you, she was forced to transfer to another province." Faced with his accusations, I gave up resisting. I let out a powerless laugh. How stupid. And I wasn't just talking about Ethan, I was talking about myself too. I shouldn't have saved either of them, just like now. Before walking away, Ethan left one last sentence. "You're on your own." We had been married, yet Ethan hated me so much that he wouldn't even bother to save my life. As I realized I was dying, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If I could do it all over again, I would never get involved with Ethan. I wasted so many years of my life for a heartless bastard like him. It was never worth it. I closed my eyes, unwilling to accept it. "Ella, this recommendation spot for grad school must include you. You're so hardworking and driven. We all feel ashamed in comparison." When I opened my eyes again, I was shocked to find myself reborn back to the period in college when we were preparing for grad school exams. My roommate Alex was sincerely congratulating me, but his words came far too early. In my previous life, my name hadn't even been on the final recommendation list. As I was doing my makeup, Diane, in her usual sarcastic tone, said, "Sometimes hard work doesn't pay off if your brain doesn't work. No matter how much you study, it's just pouring water into a broken jar. It all becomes useless anyway." After saying that, she covered her mouth and smiled. "Ella, I wasn't talking about you. You're so smart. You'll definitely get recommended." Diane and I were in the same dorm during our college years. She relied on her dazzling beauty to date quite a few guys on campus, while I was waking up at dawn and burning the midnight oil doing practice problems. She was out partying at bars, dancing the night away, and yet she was the one who got the grad school recommendation. After I failed to get the recommendation in my past life, Ethan didn't comfort me. Instead, he said, "What are you afraid of? Your dad is on the board of trustees. All you lost was one spot, but me, I could lose everything." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant when I began to suspect something was off with Diane's recommendation. Anne's words only deepened my doubts before I had the chance to investigate. Ethan stopped me. "You didn't get recommended because of your own problems. You only lost a spot. That's all. There'll be more opportunities later." Back then, I didn't understand what he truly meant, but now I do. This time, none of it has happened yet. With the memories of my previous life, I quickly found Diane's account on social media. Sure enough, she had already started humble bragging, posting about a speaking opportunity, a scholarship slot, and even a win at an academic competition. It became painfully clear that my recommendation spot had been stolen, taken by Ethan and handed straight to Diane. He gambled on the fact that I liked him. He gambled that even if I found out the truth, I'd keep his secret. After all, in his eyes, I had good grades and a powerful family background. If I really wanted to get into grad school, I could just take the entrance exams. But why? Why should something that rightfully belonged to me be taken away so easily just because I had always treated Ethan too well? Sure enough, when the official list was released, Diane's name caused a stir. "I didn't even see your name on the preliminary list. Why is Diane on it now? Diane got recommended? How is that possible?" My roommates had witnessed everything she had done. Seeing her on the list was completely beyond their comprehension. Diane had just returned to the dorm full of smugness. She pouted unhappily. "What's that supposed to mean? Only Ella can get recommended, but I can't? If you have a problem with it, go look into it yourselves. I published 2 papers this year. If you're capable, you can do the same. Ella won't mind. Her dad is on the board of another university. Unlike you guys, she's seen the world." For a moment, no one could respond. After all, there were only so many spots. The behind-the-scenes dealings were complex. If Diane had gotten in through an exception for publishing papers in competitions, they didn't know enough to argue. Even if no one believed it, there was no solid way to refute her. Diane lifted her chin like a proud peacock and smiled at me. "Ella, don't be discouraged. You're so smart. If you didn't get in through recommendation, you can just take the test instead, right?" With that, she stopped pretending and went back to her seat. I hadn't had time to ask my father to help investigate the shady dealings behind Diane's recommendation. At that moment, I didn't have any proof and couldn't say anything in the dorm. But karma always strikes like a tornado. That same night, Diane's personal account, which had thousands of followers who shipped her with Ethan, suddenly updated. She posted a 500-word essay proudly flaunting her success. In my previous life, I hadn't even had time to read it before she deleted it. This time I moved quickly. I saw everything clearly. No wonder Ethan had been involved in all of this. Diane had spelled it out in her post, plain as day. Sometimes when a professor's brother treats you too well, there's nothing you can do. I already told him I didn't want to go to grad school, but he insisted he wanted to spend more time with me. In the end, he found a way to get me recommended. My feelings today are really complicated, but honestly, being someone's top priority feels kind of nice. In order to attract more followers and solidify her persona, Diane always paired her humble brag posts with a few well-selected photos just to make everything seem real. This time was no different. She even attached a blurred-out screenshot from the university portal, showing her name on the official recommendation list. Once a post like that gets amplified, it's bound to draw attention from other students and scrutiny from the school. In my previous life, the information hadn't spread fast. Diane noticed something was off and immediately deleted her post. I never even got the chance to read it. When I saw Ethan being dragged into scandal, knowing it would damage his image in the future, I stepped up on my own. I threw money at the problem to help him get through it smoothly, clearing his name so his career could take off without a hitch. But this time, Ethan wouldn't be so lucky. In my past life, I used up all the allowance I had saved since childhood, over $100,000, to help Ethan suppress the controversy. Not this time. I was done meddling. I was just about to put my phone down and take a shower when I caught sight of Diane's reply to a comment under her post. She seemed proud of herself. So what if you study day and night? Still useless. My grades might not be good enough, but there will always be someone willing to pave the road for me. That comment hit me like a slap. In an instant, I remembered how Ethan had coldly refused to save me in my past life, all because of her. I couldn't hold back anymore. So you want to play the seductive academic sweetheart? Fine, I'll throw $100,000 into the game and send the two of you to the trending list together. Sweet, sweet couple. Let the whole internet see what you're made of. I dropped the money, and results would follow soon enough. The more arrogant Diane was now, the more infamous she would be later. I couldn't wait to see it unfold. The next morning, Diane was overjoyed as she picked out a beautiful dress. She practically beamed as she told us, "My boyfriend's coming to pick me up. We're going to a French restaurant to celebrate my grad school recommendation." I told him not to go overboard, but he insisted on spending the money for me. He said this kind of small expense is nothing to him. You won't believe it. He booked the entire restaurant. That must have cost a fortune. After Ethan became an associate professor at a university, his income had indeed increased significantly, but he seemed to have forgotten the days when he had nothing. Back then, Ethan wore clean white shirts, faded jeans washed until they were nearly colorless, and always carried a book in his hands. He never cared what others thought of him. He was obsessed with learning, absorbing knowledge. Ethan was like a sponge. Even though his family was poor, he had clear goals. Knowledge could change his destiny. Every minute outside of class, he spent working part-time jobs to pay for his tuition. I had been influenced by my father, who always liked to sponsor underprivileged kids from mountain regions. I often donated my own allowance to support students from less fortunate provinces. That's how I came across Ethan. I first saw his file in my dad's study. After learning about his academic record and life situation, I decided to sponsor him. Slowly, a connection formed between Ethan and me. Though we never met in person, we stayed in touch through phone calls. Ethan didn't even know that the first time he called me, I was standing right across the street, watching him from a distance. That boy standing by the roadside had a thin, youthful frame and a quiet sense of vitality. He looked nervous, biting his lower lip anxiously. His voice was full of caution, respect, and deep gratitude. "Thank you for your continued support. You've helped me so much. Once I graduate and leave school, I promise I'll repay you." He lowered his head slightly, embarrassed, his ears turning red as if he were a little boy waiting for praise. "I got a scholarship today. The professor said I'm the top student in my class. One of my research papers got published in a student journal." His eyes sparkled with pride and determination. "I'll work hard to catch up to you. I won't let your support go to waste." At the time, Ethan still didn't know that I was just a high school girl, and that he had already become my role model. Wasn't I the same? I studied hard, got into a university, and finally stood proudly in front of him. But in the end, all those years of financial support still couldn't compare to the curve of Diane's smile or a single love letter. A sudden shout from the dorm pulled me out of my thoughts. "Guys, look at Twitter. Our school is trending." Alex, still munching on the drama, hadn't quite grasped the situation yet but shared the news with excitement. Diane jumped off her bed and rushed over excitedly. "Who is it? Who managed to get our school trending so suddenly?" That excitement froze on her face the second she saw her own account displayed on Alex's phone screen. Her expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared. She never expected that the braggy little post she casually wrote last night would blow up overnight and rocket to the trending list. And the ranking was still climbing fast. This was just the beginning of a chain reaction. She had once listed the name of our university in the bio under her profile. Now, a university was trending #1 alongside the scandal under Diane's post. The comments section had already become a war zone. Who is this girl? She stole someone else's grad school spot and dares to flaunt it online. As someone prepping for grad school, I can't take this. A university better give us an honest explanation. Disgusting. How is this even allowed? Oh wow, professor and student. We'll dig. Put these 2 trash bags and get justice. The expression on Diane's face was truly something. She was fuming, stabbing at her phone screen in frustration. I felt a wave of satisfaction and had to force myself not to smile. Pretending to be shocked, I asked aloud in the dorm. Oh my god, who's the professor boyfriend the post mentions? Have you guys ever heard of something like this happening here? Alex, always eager for gossip, frowned and said, it's probably some old professor taking advantage of his position. Isn't he afraid of getting exposed? And that girl H posting that stuff online to show off? So groß. Diane was visibly shaking now. Suddenly, she slammed her phone down on the desk and stood up, snapping. What the hell do you mean by that? Alex jumped, startled by her reaction. Then she smirked coldly. I didn't say your name, did I? Why are you reacting so strongly? I was cursing out the blogger, not you. Diane's righteous rage shrank quickly. She fumbled to pick up her phone and opened her mouth to explain but couldn't get a word out, so I picked up the thread. Why are you reacting so intensely? Don't tell me you're connected to this. Wait, did you write that post? Alex's eyes lit up as she suddenly caught on. Diane's gaze darted around in panic, but she forced herself to sound calm. What are you talking about? Of course it's not me. You're just jealous that I got the recommendation and now you're trying to pin this mess on me. Right? Alex asked coolly. Then why were you so worked up just now? I just think it's not right to talk about people behind their backs. Oh please, he deserved it, Alex muttered. Diane's face turned red with rage. I glanced at her phone and saw that she had already deleted the post in a panic, but she really thought that was going to fix everything. The damage had been done. Diane hadn't even woken up until after 9 a.m., way too late. By that time, tons of users had already taken screenshots and shared her post. Deleting it was useless. The university had already launched an investigation. Neither Diane nor Ethan would get out of this, just as I expected. It didn't take long. While the other girls headed to the dining hall for lunch, Diane, looking completely flustered, hurriedly called Ethan. She sweet-talked into the phone. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I really didn't think it would blow up like this. I just posted it casually. I didn't expect it to cause such a huge mess. Will this affect your job? If things get worse, I can voluntarily drop out. Okay. I don't want to drag you down. Thinking no one was in the room, Diane had turned on speakerphone, but I hadn't left. I stayed hidden on the balcony, and I could hear Ethan's voice loud and clear. At this point, his tone was gentle and steady, not the slightest bit angry. You don't need to worry. No matter what happens, I'll stand by your side. Even if the school punishes me, it doesn't matter. Diane, I'm running toward you without hesitation. All you need to do is stand there and wait for me. The scorching sun blazed above as the wind rushed. Strolling through the treetops in my mind, the image of the boy who used to sit beside me reading in the sunset slowly began to blur. Back then, he said, Ella, I want to become the pride of a university. I want to be your support. One day, I'll marry you with everyone's blessing. Turns out, people always have two sides. In front of others, Professor Ethan was cold, noble, and reserved, but he could pour out his heart to me and just as easily turn and run wholeheartedly toward Diane. I stepped back into the dorm from the balcony. Diane turned pale the moment she saw me. Ella, why are you here? I thought you went out. Before I could reply, she cautiously asked, were you eavesdropping on my call just now? How much did you hear? Do you know how shameless that is? I let out a soft laugh. As shameless as you, I replied. She choked on her words, glaring at me with red, furious eyes, but she couldn't come up with a response. I found it amusing. At this point, Diane was probably eating, sleeping, and panicking every minute, terrified someone would trace the account back to her, even more afraid of the university's investigation. This dorm isn't your private property, I said. Why are you so jumpy? What dirty secrets are you hiding that make you so nervous? Diane bit her lip, her eyes filled with tears as if someone had wronged her. Just then our other roommates returned, chatting loudly as they walked in. I still can't believe someone like that came out of our school. So shameless. If I ever find out who it is, I'm going to crack their skull open. Seriously, what kind of garbage are they hiding in that head? Diane shot us a vicious glare before storming out, slamming the door behind her. Over the past few days, her now infamous post had stayed at the top of Weibo, the buzz refusing to die down. It had triggered widespread public discussion, and things had reached a point where the school could no longer cover it up. They had no choice but to act. Soon, the university's official Weibo account issued a public statement. We are currently investigating a serious matter involving our institution. A dedicated task force has been formed, and we will deliver a full explanation as soon as possible. Under the announcement, the comment sections exploded with speculation that it's some sleazy old professor. This girl's been exposed, but I bet there are more victims out there. These professors with power who don't do their job, of course, they'd use that power to threaten students. The school better investigate thoroughly and get rid of the rot. Ethan, a university's youngest associate professor, he's always been my ideal. I can't believe someone like him would be involved in this. I hope he stays true to who he was. No way it's Ethan. He's young, successful, and earned his position through sheer talent. No one understands how hard that journey is more than he does. Why would he throw it all away? Stop making baseless accusations. I saw his interview once. His way of speaking, his mannerisms, he was like a movie star. He's not just a professor, he's the pride of a university. Even if every student on campus gathered to guests, no one would dare associate Ethan's name with the scandal. Knowing his class wouldn't end for a while, I went directly to his private office, relying on memories from my past life. I opened the lowest drawer in his desk and found the journal hidden inside. Inside the journal was a pink envelope, a love letter from Diane. After pulling out the letter, I returned the journal to its exact place. In my past life, I had discovered that Ethan had kept this letter hidden in his journal. It led to a huge fight between us. I remembered him sitting silently on the couch, rubbing his temples in exhaustion, sighing like he was sick of everything around him. It wasn't until I placed the letter right in front of him that he finally reacted. Why did Ethan keep Diane's love letter? I always knew that Ethan was popular with female students. Every year, he received countless love letters, but he never paid any attention to them except for Diane's. Her letter he had carefully tucked away in his journal. He gently ran his fingertips over her name, eyes lowered, hiding emotions I couldn't read. He said, "Ella, don't make a fuss. It's just a letter." I must have forgotten to throw it away and stuffed it in there by accident. How perfunctory. When a man doesn't love you, even an explanation feels unnecessary. Only now do I realize what Ethan was hiding wasn't just a letter, but also his deep love for Diane. Since starting his job, the first student Ethan ever sponsored was Diane. On the surface, she was just a scholarship recipient, but behind the scenes, he pampered her like some academic temptress. It was as if Ethan had forgotten he was engaged to me, that he was in name my fiancé. I tightened my grip as I looked at the date on the letter. Diane had given it to Ethan exactly a month ago, and during that entire month, she had rarely come back to the dorm at night. Whenever she did, she would constantly hint about how amazing her boyfriend was. How disgusting. So they had already slept together long ago. Click. The office door suddenly opened. I quickly shoved the letter into my bag and turned around calmly. Ethan had just come back from class, a book still in his hand. His frame was lean, and under his narrow brows were those cold, clear eyes. His expression was composed. He pressed his lips into a straight line and took a moment before removing his glasses. He asked coolly, "Ella, what are you doing here?" "I just wanted to let you know that I'll be attending your public lecture tomorrow afternoon." Ethan had a scheduled open lecture the next day. As a well-known young professor, his lectures attracted most of the student body. Even school administrators planned to attend. Ethan frowned impatiently. "There's no need to come all this way just to say something so trivial." Then he glanced at me again. "Is there anything else?" "No, that's all." In my past life, I had seen Ethan as the person closest to me, second only to my parents. Years of idealism shaped how I saw him, to the point where I never noticed the indifference and distance hidden deep beneath his calm surface. When the time came for his lecture, I didn't show up as expected. I waited until every student had taken their seat, until all the school leaders had arrived. Then, halfway through Ethan's passionate, emotionally charged speech, I finally walked into the lecture hall. Minute by minute, time passed. Then, finally, at the height of Ethan's performance, my father appeared at the back of the room, flanked by school administrators. "Ethan, please stop your lecture," he said. Never in the university's history had a professor's lecture been cut off midway. Ethan was the first and hopefully the last. "I'm still in the middle of class," he replied. "The school is asking you to stop. You are required to cooperate with an internal investigation." My father had tried to be merciful, offering Ethan a final shred of dignity. His tone was polite. He hadn't publicly humiliated him. But my father was far too kind. I didn't like that this opportunity had come at great cost, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. I wanted to see exactly how Ethan, now disgraced, planned to give Diane home. Step by step, Ethan walked down from the podium with his back turned. He couldn't see what had just appeared on the giant screen behind him. It was Diane's love letter. I had arranged for this moment. It was my little surprise just for him. The letter was displayed in full view, bearing the private words of a young girl's heart. Every sentence was filled with affection for Ethan. "Dear Professor Ethan, it all began with love at first sight when I found out that you were the kind-hearted man who had been sponsoring me anonymously. My admiration deepened. No one should meet someone so dazzling when they're too young. I was foolish to think I could hold on to you, but Professor, would you give me a chance?" At the end of the letter, 5 bold characters marked her name. "Love, Diane." And just like that, what was meant to be a solemn academic lecture turned into complete chaos. All the students in the room began whispering and gossiping about the relationship between Diane and Ethan. Ethan, being escorted out of his lecture by a board member, could only mean one thing. It was connected to the web of scandal. Once Diane's love letter was exposed, her account was inevitably traced. That meant the professor boyfriend she mentioned in her post was none other than Ethan. The entire lecture hall was in shock. "Oh my God, Professor Ethan. He always seemed so cold and untouchable. How could he do something like this? The illusion is shattered. Diane is disgusting. A campus beauty? More like a complete joke. I can't believe I go to the same school as her. What a disgrace." Diane's face turned pale with rage. One student stood up. "What are you guys even talking about?" Most of the students at the university were top of their class. No one was going to back down. "Of course we're talking about you, you brainless thief. Do you know how? We work hard, staying up late doing problem sets. Do you even know how hard advanced math is? What gives you the right to whine a little and just get handed a grad school spot? This isn't fair to the rest of us. You're that blogger, aren't you? The one flaunting everything online. You dress all sweet and innocent, then backstab your roommates behind their backs, and you still dare show your face?" The crowd grew angrier. More students stood up, yelling that the school must investigate this seriously. "We demand fairness." A wave of voices erupted through the room, banners raised high with the word unfair. This time the students weren't just venting. They were standing up for themselves, fighting for a chance at fairness, not just for now but for every student in the future. I wanted them to win. I wanted to win. None of us were wrong. Staying up all night studying wasn't wrong. Standing up against injustice wasn't wrong. What was wrong was Ethan breaking the rules and betraying the profession. What was wrong was Diane thinking shortcuts were the path to success. And if they were wrong, they would have to pay a painful price. The school soon released an official decision. Ethan had violated university policy and seriously harmed student interests. Regretfully, the university announced his dismissal. As for Diane, her fate matched her previous life. She was expelled and forced to transfer to another school. But this time, Diane didn't even pretend to be upset as she packed her bags in the dorm. She scoffed. "What's so great about the school anyway? You guys are just wasting your lives stressing over a stupid degree. My boyfriend is a university professor. Even if a university doesn't want him, do you know how many prestigious schools would kill to hire someone with his talent and reputation?" No one responded. She didn't care. She continued. I'm not going to some crappy university anymore. It's exhausting. Perfect timing, honestly. I'll just stay home and be a full-time housewife. He can earn the money and take care of me. So some people still dream of being a pampered little wife. As I was heading downstairs with Alex, we saw Ethan waiting by the building entrance for Diane to come out. Ella, I need to talk to you. I told Alex to go ahead and stayed behind to speak with him alone. He looked serious. Ella, I truly appreciate everything you did for me over the years, but I never had feelings for you. I raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a half smile. I don't need your feelings, Ethan. I know you're just lashing out. Deep down, you've always liked me, but what you feel isn't love. That line sounded all too familiar. He had said the same thing in my past life. He smirked, eyes filled with cold sarcasm. Today you like a cat. Tomorrow maybe it's a dog. Whatever you want, you must have, but I'm not your toy. A toy? At the very least, he added, voice cutting, should be clean and obedient in bed. Otherwise, it doesn't even qualify as one. I paused, then cut him off coldly. You don't even deserve that word. Ethan was stunned for a second, but he quickly returned to his usual calm demeanor, brushing it off like I was just upset. He looked at me steadily and resolved and said firmly, I called you here because I wanted to tell you please don't show up again. I don't want to live under the shadow of your father's name anymore, and I don't want to be tied to you in any way. All this time, because of your father's influence, my achievements have always been overlooked. I just want to be with Diane now. She's the woman I love most in this life. I'll only choose Diane. I'll never marry you. I caught his wording immediately. One phrase leapt out in my mind, flashing back to what Ethan had said outside the Civil Affairs Bureau in my past life. Getting married proves everything. So I wasn't the only one who'd been reborn. I pressed down the smile tugging at my lips and coolly replied, in that case, let's cancel the engagement. Our engagement hadn't been made public, partly because I was still in school and partly because Ethan was a university professor. Quietly breaking it off now would save a lot of trouble. As long as both sides agreed, that was enough. Since Ethan claimed to love Diane so much, enough to stay devoted to her across 2 lifetimes, then I wanted to see how far that love could go without money or stability to support it. Love can change. The only constant is money. Diane had always been obsessed with wealth, and Ethan, who couldn't even hold on to that, thought he could hold on to love. What a joke. Reality soon proved that Ethan and Diane were both too naive, too foolish. They thought once the scandal blew over, Ethan could return to the university and keep teaching as a respected professor. But the storm didn't stop, the clouds didn't clear. Because of Diane's endless bragging and overexposure, the entire internet now knew that Ethan had abused his authority, bending the rules to get a female student fast-tracked into grad school. Who would dare hire a professor with that kind of scandal hanging over him? No matter how brilliant Ethan's academic record was, no matter how talented he might have been, it couldn't make up for the damage he had done. Ethan and Diane moved into a rental apartment and began setting up their daily life, but everything cost money, from furniture to basic expenses. Soon enough, Diane started nudging him. Ethan, maybe you can't go back to being a college professor right now, but you could definitely teach at a high school, right? You're so talented. I'm sure plenty of schools would want you. After constant urging from Diane, Ethan finally caved and reluctantly submitted his resume to a few top-tier high schools. But even then, none of the public schools would take him. At last, a small private school agreed to offer him a position, but Ethan was clearly miserable about it. A genius professor from a prestigious university, reduced to teaching high schoolers. And life wasn't done surprising him. On his very first day, before the class even began, a student's parent came to the school to drop off some clothes. The moment she saw Ethan, her face darkened. She stormed into the classroom and snapped. So this is the professor who had a relationship with his student? If he dares to lay a hand on my child, who's going to take responsibility? If you let this morally corrupt man teach my kid, I'll report your school to the Education Bureau. I'll bring other parents. We'll make a scene. Every other day, standing at the podium, Ethan's pride took a brutal hit. Just a month ago, he had been admired and revered, a star professor at the peak of his career. From childhood until now, Ethan had never been humiliated like this. He had always excelled, praised as a model student, a campus icon, the subject of countless girls' admiration. Apart from the financial struggles he'd faced in college, everything had been smooth. Even then, with my help, he had overcome those difficulties. He rose through the ranks effortlessly, showered with praise and applause, becoming the youngest professor at the university. And now, everything had been destroyed overnight. Ethan was no longer the idolized professor. He had become a man no school dared to hire. Even this nameless private high school looked down on him. The crushing humiliation slowly shattered his proud ego. With mounting pressure from outraged parents, Ethan was ultimately dismissed from the high school too. On his way home, it started pouring rain. He was drenched by the time he reached the apartment, soaked from head to toe. He slumped down on the couch like a lost soul, covering his face in agony. Diane walked out in her silk pajamas, perfectly made up, and stood in front of him. "Ethan, what's wrong?" "Trouble at work." He told her everything that had happened at school. Then, desperate for comfort, Ethan pulled her into his arms like a wounded animal seeking warmth. But Diane didn't comfort him. Instead, she said, "It's okay, Ethan. This will all blow over soon. You're so talented. If they don't want you, that just shows how blind they are. Once the drama settles, there'll be another opportunity. In the meantime, maybe you could take on some ghostwriting jobs. I know a few classmates who are about to graduate, and they're all looking for someone to write their thesis." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. He pushed her away. "I'm a university professor. Do you have any idea how much one of my papers means? And now you want me to ghostwrite for undergrads for money? That's academic fraud. My academic integrity my entire career. I won't do something like that." After everything that had crushed him in just one day, Diane's suggestion was the final blow. Her eyes reddened instantly, tears pooling. "I'm doing this for you. We need money right now, and I've been eyeing this new matching couple's necklace. I wanted to buy it for you. What did I do wrong?" Diane had always come from a poor background, and Ethan hadn't worked long enough to save much. A good portion of his previous salary had already been spent. Seeing her cry, Ethan's heart softened. He wiped her tears. While trying to comfort her, I eventually gave in to the idea of ghostwriting, and just like that, the once renowned Professor Ethan had become a hired ghostwriter. The rumors spread like wildfire across campus. Gossip about him was everywhere. One day, I saw Ethan's mother at the university gate. The moment she spotted me, her face lit up. "Ella, I'm Ethan's mother. Do you remember me?" In my previous life, I had seen her 2 or 3 times. The first was the year Ethan became a professor. She had traveled 3 days from the countryside to congratulate him, beaming with pride. "Auntie, are you here to see me?" In this life, we had only met once. She remembered me because she had learned I used to sponsor Ethan. "I'm here to find Ethan. He hasn't been answering his phone, and no one can find him. I came all the way here because I was afraid something might have happened to him." What parent wouldn't worry? She still didn't know what had happened to Ethan. Looking into her anxious, distressed eyes, my heart softened. "I'll call him for you." I dialed Ethan and told him to come to campus and pick up his mother. After hanging up, I waited with her. Thankfully, Ethan was nearby, still doing ghostwriting work for students. He arrived quickly, but instead of greeting his mother first, he looked at me with alarm. "Ella, what are you doing here? Stay away from my mom." Then he grabbed his mother's hand. "Mom, let's go." His mother froze, then shook off his hand. "Go where? Why haven't you been going to school? Isn't it work time now? Why are you wandering around? Just take me to your office. I'll rest for a bit, then leave. No need to go to your apartment." But there was no office anymore. Ethan wasn't even allowed through the university gates. "I was just running some errands. I haven't gotten back to campus yet," he said flatly. "You're hiding something from me," she said. No one knows a son like his mother. Ethan had always been obsessed with academics. He'd never leave campus unless absolutely necessary. He smiled faintly, brushing it off. "What could possibly happen to me? I'm still teaching just fine." Students passing by glanced over, recognizing him. "Hey, isn't that Professor Ethan? Didn't he get fired? He still has the nerve to show up here. He gave up his entire career for a girl. Now that's true love. What a romantic. Honestly, it takes guts." I wouldn't be able to do it. What do you mean? He was willing. He stole someone else's spot and handed it to a student who spent all her time partying in bars. What kind of person does that make him? This is unbelievable. All the murmurs and judgments from the students made their way to Ethan's mother's ears. Her expression shifted rapidly, flushing red, then turning pale. Ethan's face drained of color. Mom, please let me explain. Before he could finish, a sharp slap landed across his face. His mother used every ounce of strength in her body to hit him hard. You shameless disgrace. What the hell is wrong with you? She shouted. All these years of education. Did you learn nothing but how to humiliate yourself? I worked so hard to support you. I sent you to a top university through grad school, your PhD. You became a university professor. We held a huge banquet to celebrate your success, and this is how you repay all of us? With scandal and shame? Who are you trying to justify yourself to? Ethan stood there, cheek flushed from the slap, expression dark and unreadable. He didn't say a word. His mother's eyes filled with tears, grief, anger, disappointment, all tangled together. She looked up at the university gate and whispered, all those years of hard work, Ethan, you threw it all away for a woman. Was it worth it? You studied late into the night, skipped meals, practically lived in the lab. You don't need to apologize to me. But can you honestly say you haven't betrayed yourself? Ask yourself, do you regret getting fired? Only then did Ethan react. His eyes locked in with hers, voice steady and deliberate. No, I don't regret it. In that instant, it was as if the sky fell for his mother. She broke into sobs and suddenly dropped to her knees in front of the university gate. If my son refuses to admit his mistake, fine. I'm his mother. I failed to raise him right. I'll kneel here and atone for him. I just hope the school will give him a second chance to make it right. Her kneeling cut deep into Ethan's pride. His face twisted with shame as he rushed forward to help her up. Mom, get up, please get up. But she refused to move. Finally, Ethan lost his temper and snapped. Can you stop making a scene here? Can't we talk about this at home? Do you really want to kneel here and embarrass yourself? His mother glared at him, voice sharp and unrelenting. And what about what you did? Are you not ashamed of that? Her words were a blow to the chest, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction watching it all unfold. Ethan's expression shifted again. His eyes turned red, his chest rising and falling rapidly with emotion, but his voice was still cold. I want to be with Diane. I chose her, and I'm not letting go. She's a good woman. She cooks for me, stays by my side every day. I'm happy with her. I've never once regretted choosing her. If you want to kneel, that's your decision, but I'm done here. He turned away from his mother and walked off to the street corner across from the university. I'd been Diane's roommate for years in college. No one knew her better than I did. She partied every night until late. Most nights she didn't even bother taking off her makeup or showering. She just flopped onto her bed and fell asleep, her socks and underwear always piled together in a mess she refused to clean up. She was lazy, reckless, and loved hanging out with the worst kind of people, drinking and wasting time. The only reason Diane hadn't been exposed yet was because the time hadn't come. And just as I expected, it didn't take long. Diane soon began pushing Ethan to do more than just ghostwrite for college students. She had him writing essays for high schoolers and even elementary school kids. Word of this spread fast. The academic community was disgusted. Professor Ethan is writing elementary school essays now. He's been out of the classroom for so long. I bet he can't even keep up with our curriculum anymore. No one dares to hire him to ghostwrite. College students stopped seeking him out. Left with no options, Ethan was forced, under Diane's constant pressure, to take on elementary school assignments. Within half a year, Ethan came to see me again. But this time he wasn't the same man. The meticulous, composed Professor Ethan looked completely different. His eyes were clouded with exhaustion. The dark circles under Ethan's eyes were stark, and his entire body radiated a defeated, broken energy. How could someone like this still be worthy of being called a professor? Ella, I was wrong, he said. I couldn't help but laugh. Oh, and what exactly were you wrong about? His eyes were filled with bitterness and grief as he poured out his frustration. I used to be a respected university professor. Academic journals fought over my papers, and now I've sunk to writing essays for elementary school kids. It thrilled me to hear that. Serves him right. Looking at how pitiful he was now, I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy. In fact, it made me want to laugh even more. Isn't this what he wanted? He wanted Diane and he wanted to keep his title as professor. Wasn't that a little too greedy? Without a moment's hesitation, Ethan blurted, "I don't want Diane anymore." "And what's that got to do with me?" I asked. "She's not a good girl at all," he complained. "She doesn't cook, she's never home, and she constantly complains about how little money I make. Everything that's happened to me is her fault." Now he was turning around and blaming her. Unbelievable. Your definition of a good girl is so narrow. If she doesn't cook, she's not a good girl? Who do you think you are, a prince that needs to be waited on? I shot back, my tone icy and sarcastic. I gave him a cold smile, then added, "You're short-sighted, greedy, and pathetic. And what makes you any better?" Ignoring the embarrassment on his face, I let my smile fade and said, "Oh, and by the way, you also left me to die. Should I thank you with a banner for sending me back to this life?" For a brief moment, shock flashed across Ethan's face. He froze, eyes wide. He opened his mouth but couldn't form any words. "Ella, are you?" He looked at me with a sudden heat in his gaze, as if seeing someone long lost. But I had no interest in bonding over shared reincarnation. I wasn't here to swap stories about how great it felt to come back to life. I was here to enjoy watching him fall. "Professor Ethan," I said coolly, "wasn't this your own choice? You said it yourself. You'd rather lose everything if it meant giving Diane a home. Well, wish granted." He got the downfall he asked for, and instead of being grateful, he was still clinging to me and making a mess. Men are so unreasonable sometimes. "Ella, I was wrong," he pleaded. "Please, for the sake of the years we were married, could you talk to your father for? My dad is a board member. He's extremely busy. Do you think he has time to deal with someone irrelevant?" Ethan lowered his head, begging, stripped of the arrogant pride he used to wear like armor. It struck me again. I had overestimated him. I had lifted him up like a phoenix, but he was never anything more than a featherless bird. "Didn't you say you didn't need my dad's protection?" I reminded him. "You said your academic achievements had nothing to do with him. You're the one who always looked down on me for being a board member's daughter. So what are you doing here begging me now? Go find Diane, the one you love so much. I'm sure she'll give you a warm, happy home." His expression changed again. He covered his face in shame, sighing heavily. "Ella, I know you're angry. Everything I said before was just out of anger." "Too bad," I said calmly, "because everything I said now is the truth." From that day forward, Ethan started secretly following me. Now he wanted to play the devoted ex-husband role. He was trying to act out some tired cliché with her back drama. Unfortunately, I wasn't buying it. One night, I realized Ethan was tailing me again. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and called the police. "Hi, officer," I reported being followed. That night, under the watchful eyes of bystanders, Ethan was arrested and taken into a police car. He struggled, refusing to get in, his bloodshot eyes fixed on me like a furious, cornered animal full of resentment. "Ella, are you really going to forget everything we've been through? How could you do this to me?" I curled my lips into a cold smile and shot back, "Ethan, I'm really curious how you even have the nerve to say that." Before the officers pulled him away, I walked up to him and said quietly, "Stop following me, Ethan. You're not going to win this." I smiled faintly as he stood there, stunned, his face frozen with disbelief. "Wasn't it me who got your little essay trending online? Who exposed your pink love letter to the entire school? You should be thanking me." "Good luck, Ethan," I said, returning to him the exact words he'd once said to me in another life. The police dragged him into the car, and bystanders recorded the whole thing. Before long, the video was trending. The once respected, cold, and noble university professor had now become nothing more than a disgraced stalker. After that day, Ethan never dared approach me again. I passed my graduate school recommendation with ease, and using the experience and connections I'd gained in my previous life, quickly launched my own company. 3 years later, my company went public. To celebrate, I invited the entire staff to a bar. As I walked past one of the private rooms, I caught an unexpected sight. Diane, dressed in an ultra-short skirt, kneeling on the floor serving drinks to customers. Her heavy makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the wrinkles on her face. When she failed to please a customer, he slapped her hard. She didn't even dare to fight back. Noticing I had been watching her, the barmaid came over and explained she's one of our hostesses. I only let her work here because I felt bad for her. Miss Ella, do you know her? I smiled. No, I've never seen her before. But Diane noticed me. Her eyes followed me as I walked into the next room. The party went on until late at night. When I finally left the bar, I happened to run into Ethan and Diane standing by the entrance. It took me a moment to recognize Ethan. His eyes were lifeless, his whole body shaking, his fingers curled as if holding an invisible pen, drawing shapes in the air while mumbling to himself. If it weren't for you, Diane, I wouldn't have ended up like this. Over the years, I had led my team to win multiple awards, but Ethan had become utterly useless. You can't even go back to teaching. Diane snapped. You can't make money. All you do is live in your delusional research dreams. Wake up already, pathetic. Without hesitation, she pulled out a few crumpled $10 bills and threw them at him. Then she turned and walked off with another man. I didn't ask about Ethan again, but later at a class reunion I heard everything. It turned out that in the years since, Ethan had been obsessively focused on academic research, still hoping to claw his way back to the top, back to the days when he was admired and envied. But with no money, no access to labs, no assistants, no students, and no colleagues to exchange ideas with, he buried himself in books and notes, writing nonstop in isolation. His obsession ruined him. The more he fought to redeem himself, the more he declined. Eventually, his mental state deteriorated. He wandered around in a haze, muttering things no one could understand. Neighbors had begun calling him the crazy intellectual. But wasn't this the road he chose? After being reborn, he said it himself. He'd rather lose everything if it meant giving Diane a home.